We are in Deridder, in what I like to call the Wild West portion of Louisiana. Situated near the Texas border, Deridder was part of the notorious no man's land and has its fair share of saloon and outlaw stories you'd associate more with cowboys than typical Louisiana culture. Just goes to show that this state has it all. The early settlers were the Coushatta and Attakapas tribe, whose region stretched from the San Jacinto River to Vermillion Bay and Bayou Teche. The Kansas City Railroad passed right through this area in 1896 on its way from Kansas City to Port Arthur. The post office was named Miersburg because the postmaster's last name was Miers. The railroad workers used this spot for a camping place for their workmen and anyone wanting to get near the railroad, so land was bought for the town. Pretty soon, wood homes were building up and a depot was established. A man named Jan de Goygen would bring the first railroad to the area and name the town Deridder after his sister-in-law, Ella Deridder. Ella was from a small Dutch town called Geldermalsen, but at an early age she ran away from home and was presumed dead by her family. They later discovered that, shockingly, Ella had traveled to Louisiana and met her future husband, whose brother named the town after her. Must have been one hell of a lady. By that time, Deridder had a sawmill and timber was the prime industry of the area. The longleaf pine was the primary tree used in the industry, and it's an old legend that the largest pine in the world grew where Deridder stands now. Obviously, if this were true, the tree wouldn't last much longer and it was cut down. But in 1903, Deridder was finally incorporated as a town. As is a common theme in Louisiana history, in April 1904, an event would alter Deridder considerably in the form of ash and flame. A large portion of the business section of Deridder was destroyed by fire that was apparently caused by an arsonist. A grand jury collected enough evidence for this to indict a gambler named George Smith, who had already left town apparently. Had this arsonist been arrested, he would have been locked up in some uninteresting and bland jail for the rest of his miserable life. However, anyone arrested in Deridder only 10 years later in 1914 would be placed in one of the most unique-looking jails in the country. Behind me is the building known as the Old Beauregard Parish Jail, and it was built in 1914 and has the characteristics of the Collegiate Gothic Revival architectural style, with shallow arches, dormer windows, and a central tower. This style was popular with colleges, universities, and churches around that time. The iron bars in most of the windows give the structure an eerie and almost haunting appearance. Inside, there's a spiral staircase that leads up to the 3 floors of jail cells. Another wild fact is that each of the 9 cells had a toilet, shower, lavatory, and a window, which seemed like Buckingham Palace compared to other jails. And even some homes back then didn't have indoor plumbing. But don't let the aesthetic deceive you. Conditions were cramped, with about a dozen inmates per cell sharing these amenities and hard steel bunks for sleeping. To add a little more ominous flavoring, a long dark tunnel connects the jail to the courthouse next door, so there was no interaction between inmates and the public. It was built to house 50-ish prisoners with 13 to 21-inch thick walls made of reinforced concrete with a blasted finish, and it feels like not even Godzilla could break out of this thing. However, it wouldn't be Louisiana Dread without a little paranormal activity. On August 28, 1926, 2 men named Joe Jenna and Moulton Brasso hired Joe Breville, a taxi driver, to bring them from Deridder to the small town of Tullis. Once out of Deridder, the duo stole $14 from Breville, killed him, dumped his body in the old Pickering Mill Pond in Vernon Parish, and stole his car. If Breville's body wasn't found by boys fishing in the pond, the 2 men might have gotten away with their crimes. The body and taxi records led to their arrests and convictions, and they were hanged in the Beauregard Parish Jail on March 9, 1928. It was the only hanging to occur in the Deridder prison, but the Gothic building would forever be known as the Hanging Jail because of this. These 2 men are still wandering around the jail and is now their permanent home. People report hearing noises and wailing coming from inside the cells with no one around, as well as footsteps walking behind them, and the cells kind of close on their own sometimes. Even more creepy, tourists of the jail can see a noose eerily hanging from the 3rd floor where the hanging took place. Stop by the Beauregard Museum in Deridder on your next Louisiana road trip and come take a tour of the Hanging Jail. The museum offers an incredible archive of the history in Deridder and other towns in Beauregard Parish. For more history, horror, folklore, and culture, I'm Kyle Crosby, and this is Louisiana Dread Quick History.